All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get this started. And welcome to Observer University, Return to Play. It has been a long year plus. A lot of us haven't been on the field at all. So the goal of this is to be one of four upcoming sessions. We are going to kind of do the 10,000 foot view of being an observer today. We're just going to scratch the surface on a lot of stuff. You may have a lot of questions. Please write them down. If you have a question that you think should be addressed on this particular call, you can put it in the chat room, and then Linda is going to be collecting those. And if we have time at the end, we'll go over some Q&A. There won't be an opportunity in the middle of the presentation to go over Q&A, but there will towards the end. So with that in mind, let's get ahead and go ahead and talk about who the presenters are on this call. So you've got myself. My name is Hank Carey. I'm a member of the Observer Working Group and your host and clinician for Observer University. Also on this call will be Mitch Dangler. He's the chair of the Observer Working Group, and overall nice guy. You know him, you love him, and if you're on this call, you have hopefully you've made his acquaintance. Mitch is, in addition to being the chair of the Observer Working Group, is usually the head observer for college nationals as well as club nationals, and probably has the option of being the head observer of any national tournament he goes to. Jonna Haymaker is on the line as well with us. She is the chair of the Rules Working Group as well as a key member of the Observer Working Group. And Jonna has put in so much work on the rules. We were lucky to get her for this call tonight. I know she probably gets overdosed on talking about the new rules specifically. So it's a real treat to have her on this call to present today. And then, of course, Walter Kwong. Wally's on the line with us also, along with me, a member of the Observer Working Group. The agenda for today's call is going to be 75 minutes from the time we started. So an hour and 15 minutes, and these are the topics we're going to go over: code of conduct, fundamentals, common situations, resolving calls, misconduct overview, hand signals, the new rules, which we just mentioned, as well as fitness. And then, if possible, we will go over and do a little bit of Q&A. Again, a lot to talk about. If you have your observer manual, you'll probably see a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. It just comes straight out of that because we're doing a review of the observer manual tonight. And on that, we start with the code of conduct. And I would be your presenter for this particular quick session. So code of conduct starts with the spirit of the game. Why is it we do what we do? And I tell you, when I get on that plane on the way to a national tournament, this is one of the first things I read. Now, obviously, I've done a lot of preparation. Let's not kid ourselves, but this is a great primer for any tournament. You've done your preparation in the weeks leading up to the tournament. You're on your plane. This is what really gets my head dialed in. It says things like spirit of the game places the responsibility for fair play on the player. Oh, okay. It's not my job. It's the player's job, right? Okay. Highly competitive play is encouraged, but never at the expense of mutual respect. All right. That's good. All players are responsible for knowing and administering and adhering to the rules, right? Okay, great. So they should know some of this stuff. Now, on that note, let's remember that we don't expect the players to know the rules to our level, right? Because it probably took us a while to really become experts in the rules. So we're there to assist them in that. Also goes on to say that an intentional infraction is cheating and considered a gross offense against spirit of the game. Again, this is just stuff that kind of gets my head wrapped around. We're out here to help facilitate games. We're not referees. We are observers. Those are the names that we're given, and it's given to us for a reason because we're there to observe the game. I also like to refer to ourselves as officials because we are game officials, but the lead should be that we are an observer. The game belongs to the players, right? So that is really what the spirit of the game gets my mind dialed into. It is the players' game, and we are there to assist them with the rules. We are there to resolve disputes as well. And except where observers are empowered to decide all matters or to decide a specific matter, all the calls, all the player stoppages, those are going to be initiated by the players. And then the next topic here, professionalism, right? When we are on the field, we know a lot of the players out there, right? But that's not the time for us to be their friends. We want to be polite. We want to be friendly, right? But our leading tenet out there is to be professional in everything we do, and everything we say, in our body language, in our movement. Treat everybody with respect. Treat the coaches with respect. Treat the players with respect. Treat the folks on the sideline with respect, right? Treat the camera person who keeps getting in your way with respect, right? Yeah, everybody's out there. They've got a specific job to do. We want to make sure that as far as professionalism is concerned, that we're prepared, right? And this call is an important part of that because we have gone over a year without working a game of Ultimate. A lot of us have gone over a year without playing a game of Ultimate. So we've got to study. We've got to take the tests. We've got to talk to our friends about certain plays. We got to watch video. We've got to be prepared. And then the other part is to look the part. When we're on the field, body language sells. It's a big part of what we do is looking the part. We're out there marketing ourselves on every play of the game. Uniform guidelines, our jerseys, right? I know some people have their orange jerseys, right, and they're more of a peach, right, and they wear that peach with pride because, man, that is a sun bleached jersey they're wearing. They have observed for a long time in that jersey, but that's not how we want people to recognize us, right? Make sure that you have an orange jersey, a legal jersey, right? Peach just looks like maybe it's an old jersey, right? So make sure that your jersey is representative of you. Make sure it is a new, fresh looking jersey, and make sure that it is clean. And that means that many of us have got to wash our jerseys in the sink after the first day of tournament play. We've all done it, and we will all continue to do it. By the way, speaking of jerseys, more information to come out on jerseys. 5 Ultimate and Savage continue to be our jersey provider as of right now. They are not available on the website. More information on getting your new jersey to follow. Black shorts. So we have to be wearing black shorts, black hat, black socks, and mostly black shoes. So look the part. We don't want to come and walk on the field with anything that would cause a player to mentally object with us working their game, such as having a hat of the high school that we went to, or the college that we went to, or the state that we live in, right? We need to make sure that our uniform guidelines all match and that it is a professional looking display. So that is my first section, and we'll go ahead and switch it now over to Mr. Kwong, and he's going to talk to us about fundamentals. Wally?
All right, thanks, Hank. Yeah, so fundamentals, this again is just a 10,000 foot view of the stuff going on for observing. We're going to just go, the sections we'll cover here are really quick: rules, active and inactive calls, on-field authority, observer player interaction, winner intervene, do-over, the overrule, player overrules, justice, replay, that's a new one, and also consistency and best judgment. All right, so for rules, it's actually pretty simple. The short answer is observers really, like, we apply the rules, right? We implement the rules as they are written, and we are very critical in helping the players, right, play by those rules. Number one, what are the current rules? Obviously, we have a new rules edition out, so thank you, Jana. And we're on the 2020 to 21 edition, and this is going to be new for everybody since we've lost the last couple of seasons to obviously other things outside of our control. I think only a couple of observers actually officiated a tournament under the new rules, so for most of us, this will be a pretty new set of rules to be playing with. Again, similar to what Hank said prior, before a tournament, I definitely review the rules the night before. There's definitely a few key sections. Like, for example, I will always go over the continuation rule section before a tournament, right? Because that's the one that just pops up all the time, right? And probably at this point, I've read it at least 50 times, if not more. But it's always a good idea to do that before a tournament. And also, discussing rules with other observers, right? Like, just figure out, oh, right, that's one of the best ways to learn rules. But also, of course, during an actual game, consulting the rule book, so while we want to avoid doing this all the time, if you are unsure of something, it's better to check the rules than to get a rule wrong, because that's gonna kill your credibility real quick. Before we go on though, Hank, so the 11th edition, obviously, a lot of you have the little pocket-sized rule books that were easy to carry around in your shorts, but we don't have that yet for the current rules. So more to come on that. That may be changing later. All right. So active calls, these are ones that are observer initiated, and we don't need any cue from the players to do this. The key here for active calls is we should be loudly making them and use the hand signals. This allows players, right, as they're playing to just catch the disc and keep playing, right, in tempo, and they know exactly what the call is, right? So the classic example, right, is like a player making a cut towards the sideline, and it's a very close catch, right? And so if you are the observer on that sideline, you're going to yell out very loudly in, right, and with the correct hand signal, so that the player can just continue playing and not have to look around for you and figure out what the call is, right? I'm not going to go through the line calls and all the calls there, but most of you know that. But in general, the active calls fall into the line calls and time limits, right? Of note here is force out fouls are active. Most people, that's the one that most people forget about, but force out fouls are active. Of course, the misconduct system, that is also active, right? We will issue misconduct or assess misconduct penalties without any input or any player initiating that. Inactive calls are, of course, from the name, player initiated, and observers can't act without players first making the call. All right, and all calls are inactive unless they are specifically listed as active. And so we've got examples there, and obviously this is not a complete list, right? So your usual foul marking and stuff. But the one to note here, which has caused some confusion in the past, disc up down is an inactive call. All right, on field authority. I'm not going to go through like all the roles here. The roles are defined in the observing system sections, and we'll cover that later, right? So obviously we have observer and linespersons. In general, the observer with the best perspective will make the call. Usually that's the closest observer, but not always. For example, if you are in a 4 observer system, right, and there's a close sideline catch, the observer who can best see the catch and the receiver's feet at the same time, right, they have best perspective, right, and they won't necessarily be the closest one. Sometimes though, you will need to consult with other observers. If that is the case, that's perfectly fine, but do it quickly, right? So immediately after, say, a receiving foul or whatever, in that stoppage, right? If look at your observing partner or partners, and see real quick. If you got it, great, you got it. But if they're coming over, it's like, all right, they probably have something. But again, make sure it's quick, right? We don't want this to turn into a long delay. And conversely, if you don't have anything useful to add, like for example, if it is a very clear foul and you know that the other observer saw it, there's really no reason for you to run in there, right? That's just making the stoppage take longer, right? So if you have useful information, get in there, give it. Otherwise, stay put, and we want to keep the game rolling. Also, avoid indicators of agreement or disagreement with the observer making the ruling. And it's also very useful to discuss any issues or non-calls, right? Like if you say there's a foul that the players agreed that did not contest, or they retracted it. It's kind of useful to talk about those calls at between points or timeouts or whatever. And also, it kind of goes along with this. If you're observing at a tournament and your game finishes early or something, and you're watching another game, remove your observer jersey. We don't want to confuse any players or spectators that you're actually taking part in that game when you're actually just a spectator. So, yeah. Observer player interaction. All right, here we go. You should that first bullet point there. You should definitely cover that in the pregame meeting. But players may ask you for a rules clarification, right? So where they ask you what is the rule, right? And they aren't asking you for a ruling on the play. Or of course, they can also ask you for the ruling on the play, right? They can ask those for those two things separately. If they do ask you for a play or for a ruling though, and you do make one, that is it. That is final, and that's it. So when players are asking you for a ruling, right, they don't need to precisely know the name of the infraction, right? If they describe and they're like, well, isn't that a violation? That is sufficient, right? So if they, for example, describe a travel, right? But they aren't called, right? So for the classic one is, right, like if the receiver runs into the end zone and brings it back to the line without a ground tap, and that's what they describe without saying travel, that's still a perfectly valid call. Like we're not going to nitpick about that, all right? But at the same time, though, like certain things might require some clarification from the players, right? So the two classic examples of like a receiving foul, right? Are they calling contact on the body versus arm, right? Or what specific type of travel are they calling? Right? Once you have the relevant information, make the ruling, and that's it. And keep your ruling succinct. Just the resolution should be observer ruling foul or observer ruling no foul, and that's it. After you make your ruling, describe how the play is to resume. So for example, dis to white, and we'll restart with a ground check. When to intervene. So observers, we should be ready to quickly rule on a contested play. Again, the recommended time limit is about 20 seconds or so. And as stated previously, we should confer quickly if needed. The players should discuss the call before appealing to the observer, right? Keep in mind, we are observers. We're not, this is still a player, spirit of the game. This is still a player officiated game, right? They should be talking amongst themselves first. But again, if there isn't, if they can't come to a resolution within that 20 seconds, we should be getting in there to get the game rolling. There are instances where we should step in where the players can't make the call if they're injured. And in that case, we just automatically resolve the calls for them. The do-over, obviously something most of us should be pretty familiar with. Players may agree to the do-over, and that's fine, right? If both players agree to just send it back to the thrower with no further interaction with us, that's great for me. Like, takes care of, I don't have to do anything. However, if either player disagrees and either player wants you to make a ruling, then you make the ruling, and of course then we go from there. The observers though, we need to be 90% certain on that ruling, and if we are not 90%, the observer ruling should be to send it back, right? So obviously check if you're not sure, check with your other observers, and if you agree with 90% certainty, then that's fine. If you have two observers with different rulings, then that means you do not have that certainty, and you should send it back as well. Player overrule, pretty simple, right? Players may overrule observer rulings to the detriment of the team. The most common one is in and out of bounds, right? Like if the observer rules one way. But again, the players must overrule this to the detriment of their team, and it must be one of the players on the field. In general, observers should accept the player overrule. There are very few instances, I would think, where an observer should not accept that overrule. Basically, this comes into play where situations where players are just openly flaunting safety or something to that nature. In that case, sure. So remember, for justice, we're observers, right? We're not refs, right? So players might agree to the wrong outcome, right? And even if it's not supported by the rules, and that's perfectly fine. If they do that, that's not our job. They've agreed to it. Let them do it. And when we do make a ruling, we only rule on the current play and the information provided by the players, right? It's only the play in front of us that we're worried about right this moment. Not in certain other sports, there's always been complaints about makeup calls, right? Where like, ooh, that was the last bad call in that last play, so they're kind of getting it back. It's like, so in ultimate, we do not want to do that, right? We just rule on what is currently in front of us. Use of replay. This is new in the rules, I think. I think prior to this, we were not allowed to use replay, but in the current rules, the 2020 to 21 edition, Rule 3A2 for the full wording, but we can use replay if the footage is readily accessible, right? But we can't delay the game. So for example, if you're in the stadium and the replay is shown up on the Jumbotron or whatever, then sure, the players can use that. You can use that information, but this has to be within the usual 20 seconds for the resolution, right? We can't delay the game and wait for the replay to show up on the screen. Consistency and best judgment. We definitely want to have the same ruling or consistent rulings across all observers, right? Players should have an expectation that all of us, right, observers, two different observers put on the same game are going to have the same ruling, right? And this is both within a particular game crew, right? So if you and your partner, right, like it doesn't matter if the play happens on one side of the field versus the other, it's assumed that your both observers will give the same ruling, right? And we also want to have that consistency across different crews at the same tournament, right? We don't want something that was ruled one way in one game suddenly change on the players, right? That's going to cause all kinds of confusion. So make the correct call, and that won't always be the correct call. That won't always be the popular call, right? At best, half the players will not be pleased with your call. So that's going to happen, but again, make the correct call. And it's really useful to discuss those close calls, right, at convenient times with either your observing partner or the rest of the observing crew at a tournament. And this last point isn't really stated in the observer manual, but I think this is probably a good place to put it. Always be aiming to improve. And this is something I talk about with, because I do a little bit of coaching with my players, is that if you're not trying to get better, you're regressing, right? And if you think that you're good enough now, like I guarantee you, you're not. And I've been there before, right? As an observer, I'm like, oh, like I think I'm pretty good now. And then when I look back on that time when I was in that mindset, it's like, actually, I don't think so. So you always have to be looking to improve your observing, and that's how you stay good and get better.
All right, thanks, Wally. Appreciate that section. Next up is going to be Mitch Dangler. He's going to be talking to us and walking through the Observer Manual section on common situations.
How about let's try that now with the mute button off. So I'm going to be talking about common situations here. Lots of stuff to go over, so I'm just going to kind of go over bullet point one by one. The very first thing, we've reordered these in the manual from the previous edition to kind of put them more in the order that you would come across them in games. Pre-game discussion. So show up early. Usually we say be at the field 15 minutes before game time and do your captain's meeting 10 minutes before game time. Sometimes tournaments the time format of tournaments don't really allow that. But go over quick introductions, introduce yourself to the players and the captains, and get the captains to introduce each other. Go over the game format, like what the game is being played to, the time caps, what they are in terms of like 75 minutes or 90 minutes or whatever. Go over the active calls that you're going to be making. Remind them that the misconduct system's in play. You don't need to go through all the details of the misconduct system, but do remind them that it is being enforced. And the one thing I always do is, for a specific, is I always remind them, keep the sidelines clear, because that's just something that they should always kind of have in mind. And hopefully the captains will convey that to their players. Time caps, know the time caps for the game. John is going to go over the updates to the rules, but we have simplified caps a little bit, so they are new. Keep track of them. Don't rely on the horns. You may be on the far corner field, but the horns, you don't really hear them, or the horns might not blow on time. We've actually had to restart a game at regionals that was a qualifying game for nationals because the horns got blown too early. Time limits between turnovers. So basically, every time the disc hits the ground or is intercepted is a turnover. Anytime it hits the ground, you need to be counting either your 10 or your 20 seconds. 10 seconds if it's out of bounds, or if it's inbounds. 20 seconds if it comes to rest or is gone out of bounds at all, or comes to rest in the end zone. Remember to count your pre-stall when on pulls that have landed uncaught. And remember the count starts when the disc actually comes to rest, not when it first hits the ground. That's a kind of a common new observer error that we try to correct quickly. What do we got here? Time limits between points. So this has gotten a bit more complex. There's a lot more to do here, and I'm going to go over this one in a little more detail. Sorry, John, I'm stealing your thunder. Time limits, the total time between points has gotten shorter, but only by 5 seconds. First 25 seconds in a mixed gender game is determining what the gender ratio is going to be. So by the time 25 seconds rolls around, the deciding team needs to tell the observer with them at that end to what the ratio is going to be, and that observer will signal to the other observer, and that other observer will echo the signal to communicate that they've seen it. At 35 seconds, you're going to give 20 seconds to the offense that they need to have their 7 on the line and holding positions. They don't have to signal readiness yet, but they have to have their 7 on the line, and kind of the rest of the players need to be clear, except for maybe a coach or a captain that's doing the coaching in between points. 45 seconds, give the 10-second warning. If they've already given a line at 50 seconds, go ahead and give a 20-second warning to signal readiness. Readiness is still 70 seconds. 55 seconds is when they need to have established their line. If they establish their line right at 55 seconds, you're going to forego the 20-second warning and just give the 10-second warning at 1 minute. And then at 1 minute 5 seconds, so 65 seconds total, the other observer with the pulling team is going to give 20 seconds to the defense to tell them to pull. And at minute 15 or 75 seconds, they're going to give their 10-second warning. So what that looks like visually, you give the gender ratio signals. Remember, both observers are going to give that. Offense establishes a line. You're going to give that horizontal line, horizontal arm pointing towards the player, towards the players, and then the other observer is going to raise a hand quickly just to acknowledge they saw that, and then both observers are going to lower their arms. And then you're going to give just your standard 10 and 20-second warnings up high. Just bring them down so you can see my fists in the camera there, but up high. I know I'm really bad about just giving it a shoulder height, but it's also it's mainly for the players you're talking to, but it's also for everybody else watching who might want to be interested in knowing how much time they have. When the offense is ready, signals readiness, the receiver or the observer with the receiving team is going to stand behind the offensive line off to about 5 yards off to the side from the last observer or from the last player, and they're going to have that hand up in the air and they're going to hold it there until the pull. So Next, we have offsides. Remember, only call offsides if it's obvious. If there's any doubt whatsoever, don't call it because you're not helping the game at all. You're just delaying it on a very, very, very marginal infraction. Do not echo the offsides call from the other end. The reason we did this, it was kind of a back and forth. The reason we decided on this is we want the teams to clearly know which team is offsides, because if observers at both ends are yelling offsides and they're both signaling it, who knows who's offsides? Because remember, it doesn't stop play anymore. John is going to go over the scenarios in the rules section, but offsides is a little bit different. And be a little patient with the players because they're learning this just as much as we are. Pretty much only the only players that are going to have seen this before are players that are coming fresh off of YCCs from 2 years ago. Thrower marker fouls. This is a very common ruling that you're dealing with, common call. Remember to position yourself so that you can see the space in between the thrower and the marker, or at least where that space should be if there isn't space. And if there isn't space, that's probably something you should be talking to the defense about. Remember that in determining marker foul, whether a foul was on the marker or not, a lot of it's going to rely on whether the marker is in legal position. So if the marker is too close, if they're in contact with the thrower, then odds are it's going to be a foul on the marker. If the foul has nothing to do with, like if they were wrapping with one arm but their body is legally positioned and that's where the contact was, well then that's considered a legal position for that part of their body. But generally, if you're too close, pretty much most of you is going to be too close. Travels, remember there's a lot of different kind of travels. Watch for rounding the corner after the catch. So as soon as that receiver makes the catch and they're on the run, make sure they come to a stop in a pretty straight line. A little bit of variation, if they're 5 degrees off, probably not something that players should be calling, but probably 10 degrees or more, that really starts to get into rounding the corner, especially when you do the full fish hook. Watch for foot drags on hucks. Remember that travels without throws no longer stop play. So basically the defender is just going to suspend their count, point to where the thrower should have their pivot foot, and the player moves over there, ground taps, and moves on. Fast count and contested stalls. Keep a count in your head to compare for fast counts. I've certainly been in when the thrower is on the far side from my sideline. There have been times when there's a fast count call and I'm not close enough to hear. I go over there and they said fast count. I'm like, well, what was your count at? And they say 7. And I'm like, well, I was at 3 in my head, so that's probably a fast count. Remember, you can overrule stalls for reasons different than described. So, when we're ruling on fouls, we want to make sure we're ruling on what's called. But if a thrower says, no, I got the throw off before he said the T in 10, and you're like, no, it was still in your hand. But even though you didn't say fast count, the marker was fast counting. So we're going to go ahead and uphold that contested stall and either let the throw stand or come back at stall 8. Let's see, it's pretty much always the result of the throw is going to stand. There might be some times where the thrower still has the disc in their hand for a really egregious fast count, but odds are if they still have the disc in their hand, and it wasn't like an egregious count, probably it was gonna be a stall anyways. Contested marking violations. Remember that the continuation rule applies unless another call negates it, like a uncontested receiving foul. But we've gone into a little more detail on this in the manual. And we've gone into a little more detail on this in the rules as well. But do keep in mind that a player should only be contesting a marking violation in terms of contesting continuation, in terms of like this marking foul affected this bad marking violation call affected my ability to defend the throw that just got off and got completed. They should only be using that if, like, if they said, if the thrower said disc space and the thrower or the marker has to look down to see if they're too close, and while they're looking down, the thrower gets a throw off and the marker says no contest, I wasn't too close, and if you agree with that, then even normally if the throw is complete, continuation would say, okay, no, it stays. But if the action of actually checking out the quality of the call affected their ability to stop that throw, then they can bring that throw back, kind of overruling the continuation rule. Sideline catches, remember to watch the player's feet right up before the catch, and then watch the catch, and then look right back down on their feet, and then back up at the catch to make sure that they didn't bobble the disc. Don't want to miss those bobble calls, especially if you're on ESPN and it's semis of nationals, because then everybody's going to get on Twitter and tell you that you were wrong, and that's life. Disc out of bounds, don't stop a moving disc on the ground. If the disc is rolling around, just let it go, because if you stop it, that's going to start the pre-stall sooner than it would. If the disc is going to go way, way, way out of bounds, then maybe we might want to start getting a replacement disc, but don't stop a rolling disc. Let's see here. Why am I not? Oh,
It's me.
sorry. I'm stealing your thunder.
No worries. This one's not bad. So this is a pretty short section. So when we're resolving calls, number one rule, make sure you know what the call is and who made the call, and verify that before you say anything. And try not to give a facial expression like you made that call instead of, just have your game face on, as Hank would say. Repeating Wally here, be 90% certain that you had the requisite perspective to rule properly. Consult as needed with your partner or partners. If you're not sufficiently confident on a ruling, do-over is the right outcome. Players don't want us to make up calls. And so a do-over is the right thing here. Be consistent, repeating Wally again. So this used to be just our observer procedures, but we sort of codified it in the rules. So now this isn't just a suggestion on how to resolve calls. This is in the rules on how you're supposed to resolve calls. And so if you're resolving multiple calls on the same play, the outcomes should be resolved in the reverse sequence. So last infractions resolve first and work your way back in time. There are a lot of little edge cases that are discussed in the rules about what qualifies for same play. And so go ahead and read those. That's next. That's a deeper level than we need to talk about here. Okay, yeah. So active calls. So these are your line calls and things. Be in position. Sometimes you can't help it if a player steps right in front of you, but the most important thing is to be in position. When you make the call, give the hand signal plus loudly, in, out, so that if they're not turned facing towards you, they still know what the call is. And it's not a mistake. I want you to be in position. So I just repeated that. Next. Okay. So sorry for the diagram, but I like these. So when you're resolving inactive calls, there's a whole flow. It's actually not this complicated when you're doing it. The key, I think, in this diagram is this upheld question. That's the only, if you get to an observer ruling, and yes, that's the only time you're ever going to be making the observer ruling signal. The other times you'll never be making it. So if you're just, yes, that one. So if you're just, if you're just, if it was uncontested or they didn't ask for a ruling, never give the observer ruling signal, only if they come to you. And then at that point, you're going to do overruled if you can't see me, overruled if you disagree. And then if you agree, then you do observer ruling, foul or whatever the actual signal was. I just put I found this is the same information that's in the observer manual. It's just in a different format. So hopefully I haven't made any mistakes in transferring that. Okay, that's it for this section.
Back to Mitch for a misconduct overview. And while Mitch is unmuting himself, I'll say, just to reiterate, you may be watching this this session and think, this is a lot of basic stuff. That's what we're doing here. We're going back to the basics, almost starting over. If we're doing this now, then down the road when we get on the field, it was like, yeah, we already reviewed this stuff. It's all fresh in our mind. Hopefully there's some new things that or not new things. Hopefully there's some things you're being reminded of that maybe you forgot about. But really the goal on this session is to get back to the basics before we can then get back to the really deep stuff, which I'm looking forward to in the next few sessions. Mitch.
Yeah, we're basically just knocking the rust off. So here, come on. Why am I going? There we go. So misconduct system, there are 4 types of misconduct fouls. Basically, technical foul, team misconduct foul or a blue card, personal misconduct foul or a yellow card, and ejection, which is the red card. Technical foul, basically minor misconduct items that affect the game presentation. So that would basically never stop play to issue a technical foul, wait for a stoppage or until the end of a point. If it's a sideline encroachment and it doesn't need to be addressed right that second, even at the next stoppage, you can wait until in between points. Don't be ticky-tack or tic-tac, as I've misspelled here, but don't be ticky-tack about these issues. Talk to teams before issuing technical fouls, unless the violations are really extreme. If you give the goal signal and like half the team is already at midfield on the field as you're signaling goal, maybe that's an extreme issue. But they're just a couple steps over. Like maybe talk to them. Hey, remember, let's wait till we give the goal signal before we run on the field. We're not looking to, we're definitely not looking to see who can rack up the most technical fouls, which team or which observer. If I ever hear observers doing that, we're probably going to have a sit down. Examples of a technical foul is basically sideline violations and general swearing. Not swearing directed at an opponent or a game official or a tournament official, but just general swearing when in front of kids and spectators that shouldn't be hearing that. Come on. Team misconduct, blue card. This is kind of the bread and butter of the misconduct system. General misconduct that affects gameplay. Again, never stop active play to issue a TMF, wait for the next stoppage, but you do want to do the next stoppage. You don't want to put it in your pocket for 5 stoppages down the line, especially if it's going to be the 3rd one. Be proactive where possible. Talk to players about fouls and violations before going to cards. If you see players bumping on the mark a lot or doing a whole lot of hand checking that seems to be the other team seems to object to, maybe talk to the players like, hey, 72, watch the hands. You're really using your hands to stop your opponent's cuts. Only card what you see, not what you think or were told happened. So if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, 75 just punched me in the face, well, you need to see 75 actually throw the punch. But only go by what you see. Maybe if somebody comes up and say something happened, you can certainly check in with your other observers, but one of you does need to see it before you issue a card for it. Now if a player is going to admit to doing it, that's another thing. But in general, TMF should not be given for uncalled violations or problems teams haven't complained about unless it's really egregious. We've really tried to emphasize this in the last couple of years, just because I think we were getting a little aggressive with it, and a lot of the players were not liking that we were getting ourselves kind of injecting ourselves into the game so much. So if you see a lot of double teams, don't be afraid to say, hey, are you guys okay with the number of double teams you're seeing, or check in with a captain or a coach. But if you see like 3 players within 5 feet of the thrower every throw on a point, I would have no problem with issuing a TMF on that, even if nobody said anything about double teams. Teams may overrule TMFs against opponents. We can we can fail to or choose to not accept their overrule. Basically, if it's safety oriented, as Wally alluded to before. Same with the technical. Technicals for sideline encroachment, it's not that big a deal. One area we wouldn't, probably the one specific area we wouldn't accept a player overrule is if teams are trying to actively get around the USAU's swearing policy. It's not a particularly popular policy, and if teams just say, well, you know, we're fine with it, you can issue all the technicals you want, we're just going to overrule them left and right, then you could say, no, well, we're not going to accept that because you're obviously just trying to flout USAU's policy and authority there. Examples for blue cards would be repeated fouls or violations, taunting, swearing at opponents or officials. Pretty standard there. I think most of us have seen that. Personal misconduct foul or yellow cards. Kind of major misconduct issues, generally involving player safety or extreme spirit of the game issues. Remember, these do also count as a TMF. PMFs count, which I guess I have that twice there. PMFs count as towards misconduct penalties. 2 PMFs in one game is an ejection, and that ejection will carry over for two consecutive halves. So if it happens in the second half of a game, it'll be the remainder of that game and the first half of the next game, if there is a next game of that tournament. It does not carry over to, like if it's in the finals, it doesn't carry over to the next tournament, the first game of the next tournament. We're used to address behavior that, and that sentence that I failed to complete late last night, I would say that has no place in the game, that we need to address immediately. Basically, bad bids are really where we need to do that. I think we've been a little hesitant to give out yellow cards on bad bids. We've given out a lot of blue cards in the past. We should probably move more towards yellow cards on dangerous bids. One thing I see observers do is they'll draw the line at whether a player was injured or not. So like, wow, it was a really bad bid, but they missed. Or that, you know, it was a collision, but everybody got up and they were fine. Well, we issued a blue card, but if he would have sprained an ankle, then we would have gone the yellow card. Let's get rid of that. If it's a bad bid, a dangerous bid, it should be a yellow card, and that's going to address it a lot more quickly with that specific player. Because usually it's not as much of a team-wide issue as it is a specific player or a few player issues, and those yellow cards will go a lot faster towards addressing the behavior. Really egregious swearing at opponents or officials, like if they're really, really prolonged, really bad language, we could use a yellow card there. I tend to be a little harsher on coaches than I am players, just because, especially in college game, because the coaches are kind of the adult, and the more of the adults in the room that need to be setting a better example. Shoving would certainly qualify as a yellow card. Ejections, these should be extremely rare. There are extreme misconduct issues that require immediate removal from the game. Count as a TMF towards misconduct penalty. They count as 2 PMFs towards forfeit. We're not going to go into that. I don't think that's ever really happened, and it should never happen. Examples: throwing a punch, really, really egregious shoving, as like, you know, shoving someone hard to the ground, purposely striking a player with a disc, not accidentally. If you trying to spike down at a player's feet, and it slips out of your hand and gets them, or, you know, if they just kind of flip the disc, not looking where they're throwing it, it happens to hit a player, that's not something we should be yellow carding. But they're spiking, if there's, you know, throwing the disc at somebody to strike them, that's certainly ejection worthy. Please note that ejected area players must leave the area. They can't just sit on the sidelines and watch and interact, or even just sit there silently. Generally have them go to Tournament Central. They cannot watch the game, and if they won't leave, you can certainly tell their captain, well, it's going to be a forfeit if they don't leave, and that will usually get them to leave. Again, they are ejected for 2 consecutive halves, same as the second yellow card. Implementation. So whenever you give a PMF or an ejection, definitely notify the head observer and the competition director. You don't necessarily need to find the head observer immediately, but if you are issuing, especially if you're issuing an injection, somebody from the tournament should probably, like a tournament director or a director of competition, probably should get on the radio and tell them. Just tell it, like if you're at a major tournament, you can tell the scorekeepers who have radios to call somebody over, because it's probably, a competition director should probably be watching the remainder of that game anyways. Notifies the coaches and captains of both teams when issuing all technicals and cards. 3 technicals or 3 TMFs result in a misconduct penalty. Note those don't combine. They are in different buckets. So if you have 2 technicals and 1 TMF, that's not a misconduct penalty. But 3 technicals or 3 TMFs do result in a misconduct penalty. Then teams can choose to waive misconduct penalties for opponents. They can't waive them for themselves, but they can waive them for opponents. You really shouldn't overrule this unless teams are trying to like agree to throw punches or agree to have egregiously dangerous bids, or they're trying to get around the swearing policy. But if a team comes to you and says, look, I don't want to, that's a yardage penalty on a sideline encroachment, I don't want to win that way, let's just play like we're playing, that's fine, that's great, just let them do that. We've certainly seen that happen. Team misconduct penalties, so whether it's against the offense or defense is determined by who has possession of the disc at the time of the issuance, not at the time of the infraction. So if there's a bump on the mark and you're giving a 3rd TMF for that, but continues on, there wasn't a stoppage, and you're just waiting for the next stoppage. If there's a turnover and now the defense that committed that violation now has the disc on offense, and then there's a stoppage, that's when you apply the misconduct penalty at that moment. So they're on offense, so it would be against the offense. So if it's against the offense, the defense chooses to either have the offense move the disc to the reverse brick, so the middle of the end zone of defense for the offense at stall 1, or they choose to keep the disc where it is at the stall reached +1, not to come in over 9. If it is against the defense, which is usually more often the case than not, offense chooses to either move the disc to the attacking brick and come in at stall 1, or they can center the disc where they are. Sometimes going to the attacking brick might be moving backwards, and then they would come in at stall 1, or they can just choose to keep everybody where they are. Maybe they have an open cut in the end zone they don't want to give up, and then the disc is where it is, stall 1. Misconduct penalty between points, basically no pull, and you either start from the reverse brick if against the offense, or attacking brick if it's against the defense. Anytime the disc is moved, then it's treated like you're coming out of a timeout where the offense sets and then the defense matches up, and then the defense restarts play unless they take too long, in which case the offense can start play. So I'm going to give it back to Hank, and he's going to go over hand signals.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. We'll make this a pretty quick section. Hand signals are important because we talked about being professional on the field and how do we interact with people? How do we look in our uniform, right? Hand signals, players can look at the way you're doing hand signals and let me just back up here. Anytime you walk in the field, players are going to have an opinion of you. You may like the opinion or you may not like the opinion. And you have to ask yourself, how did that opinion get out? Well, how was I carrying myself on the field? How was I conducting myself on the field? Well, when it comes to hand signals, this kind of falls into that bucket on how we are judged on the field by other observers and other players. So it's important that our hand signals be crisp, that we look the part. That when we do a hand signal, we might as well be putting a clinic on that field because our signals are just that good. We cannot facilitate a game if we don't communicate. And that's a big part of the hand signals. The hand signals are for the other observers. The hand signals are for the other players. The hand signals are for the folks on the sideline watching the game, for the people in the stands watching the game, as well as the commentators who may be broadcasting that game so that they can share it to the rest of the world, right? The rest of the viewing audience. You give the travel signal. You give the offside signal. You give give the timing signal, right? These are all important signals to communicate just not only to the people on the field, but for the game to be spectator friendly as well. It's important that we know all the hand signals and that we practice all the hand signals. Now, I tell you, video is so invaluable. If you're lucky enough to find yourself on some sort of a recorded game, you need to go back there and watch that game, not just to watch the game, make sure you got the calls right, but to make sure that your hand signals were clear to everybody. Mitch had mentioned earlier that when he does his hand signal for, I think, like they give him the 10 and the 20, sometimes his hands don't go up as high as he'd like. Well, that's good to know, right? What else do we need to know about our signals? What else do we need to know about these things? You're going to lend credibility to our performance and our positioning on the field. Hand signals are so important. So I'm just going to show a couple of samples of hand signals. And by the way, there are additional hand signals. We've added new hand signals. They will be in the new observer manual, which we will be talking about at the end of this session. But this is the foul signal, right? You see where the hand is? The hand is kind of up towards the chin line. Some people, when they do the foul signal, they hold it way above their head, right? It looks kind of funny that way, right? But you're doing it so that everybody else on the field can see it. I would encourage you to give the personal foul signal as you see it here in the diagram. Make sure that that arm is out there straight and that the other arm is bent at the elbow. Another signal that sometimes we get wrong is the chop, right? Like, wow, this is such low-hanging fruit. Yeah, it is low-hanging fruit, so it's so easy to fix, right? A lot of people, this diagram is a 45-degree chop. You see NBA basketball refs do that a lot. Some observers will do the 90% chop. That's where you chop out straight, and so your hand is in line with your shoulders, right? You don't want that. Why don't you want that? Because if a player's running by and you do a 90-degree chop, you're going to hit him in the throat. Right? You don't want to do that. And it hurts when you do that to a player. It doesn't just hurt them, it's going to hurt you as well. So let's get that hand signal down to the 45-degree chop. Another one is, how are we signaling readiness? How are we signaling call on the field? What I see most commonly with this particular signal is the person thinks the hand's up, but it's actually more off to the side, kind of 45 degrees off to the side. Make sure your hand's up, make sure it's nice and straight. We want those crisp signals. And then the money signal. That's the one. Everybody's looking at you, right? We've got the disc is in the end zone, the people who are signaling all clear, and that's when you go up nice and smooth with the goal signal, right? Take it up nice and smooth. You don't want to look spring loaded and go up really quick. Nice and smooth. Make sure that those hands are parallel and sell the call. All the eyes are on you, but you're just echoing what the athletic player did on the field, and we want to make sure that we do that right. So hand signals, important to know them all. Important to do them well. We want to look crisp when we're out there so that we're communicating with everybody on the field and all those folks who are watching the game as well. So that is it with hand signals. I kind of I'll let you know, I did the agenda for this, which is why I have the shortest sections. And now with the power section of this, new rules. This is the section that's not in the observer manual. If you were tuning out on some of this stuff, I don't blame you. This is where you need to pay attention. Let's send it over to Jana.
Yep. So we're not going to go over every little detail of the new rules, but the ones that perhaps matter the most to us as observers. And so the reason I actually highlighted this in the spirit of the game is, so an intentional infraction is cheating and considered a gross offense against the spirit of the game. I know we've had instances where players are like, can't I just go off sides? I'll take the penalty. It should not be considered cheating because these penalties are in the rules. So we wrote this in the rules to let folks know that intentionally breaking the rules is considered cheating, even though there are infractions or there are penalties for those infractions. So if they ask, you're not supposed to do it. This is this little thing, we renamed playing field proper to central zone, but just make sure you call it the right thing. If you ever, I don't know if I was the only one who ever said playing field proper, but it's central zone. Best perspective. We brought in things a little bit. And so you can now seek the perspective of sideline players to clarify rules and to assist in making an appropriate call. So before, we always said you should keep it on the field. If the player actually want to ask the sideline, they can. Coaches are not allowed to give their perspective of a play. They can only clarify a rule. And Wally already mentioned this one. Jumbotrons, things that are really quickly accessible, they can use those to assist in making the right call. Okay. So this affects us a lot. I like to think it got simpler, but since it's new, it might be hard to remember. A game now is never going to go over the game total. So the game, like when we say it's a game to 15, it's actually going to be a game to 15. It's not going to be a game to 17, maybe, or maybe a game to 16. It's a game to 15. We have this new thing that we're calling a halftime target. And this is useful for windy situations and hot situations. It's like, or, maybe in newer player games where you're not going to actually make it to halftime, or halftime might be, 80% of the way through the game. It's the number of, well, we'll get to the halftime cap, that the halftime target is half the goals. So in this case, 8. Cap, we actually named them caps now. So the cap is, we have 3 of them. So you continue playing until the current scoring attempt is completed. And then for a soft cap, if the score is not 15 to whatever, you add 1 to the highest score, and that's the new game total. So there's no more win by 2. Hard cap. If the game is not tied, the game's over. If it's tied, you just play 1 more point. And then the halftime cap is for, sorry, and I spoke too soon before. The halftime cap is for when you're never going to reach that halftime target, and you create a new halftime target once you reach the halftime cap. The key to remember is there's no more win by 2. You're never going to go over the game total. So we've changed a few things on the timeouts. It's no longer a turnover if you take a timeout and none remain. You just add 3 to the current stall count. If that results in a number that's greater than or equal to 10, it is a turnover. But in most cases, it's just +3. We did add procedures for dealing with open exposed wounds. Please look at the rule book. Basically, it needs to be effectively covered within 70 seconds, or the player subs out. Or the team can call a timeout to gain more time. We did add this, so any player, coach, or observer should call an injury timeout for a player who is bleeding or has an exposed open wound. This is the preference of USAU's medical committee. So if we see a player dripping blood, we do have the authority to call that injury timeout for that player. We did add spirit of the game timeout procedures into the new rules. Please read those before a tournament, because they're if you've done WIFDIF games, they're slightly different than WIFDIF. And so please read the procedures. I think we laid it out pretty clearly in the rules. And if we didn't, just ask. Okay, I think Mitch alluded to this. So offsides is not an automatic stoppage. So if the pulling team goes offsides, the first instance of offsides by the pulling team, the location is the brick mark. For the second and subsequent instances of offsides, it's midfield. So that's similar. The difference is to actually for that to take those penalties. The receiving, so you have to let the disc hit the ground untouched. And then call brick or mid, basically everybody claps, but anyways, you put your hand up and say brick or midfield. And then you take the disc to that spot, either the brick or the midfield, and touch the disc to the ground. The key though is to get those penalty locations, you have to let the disc hit the ground. In all instances of offsides by the receiving team, play stops after the outcome of the pool is decided. And basically you set up like a team timeout. And if both teams are offsides on the same point, you basically combine the penalties. Play is going to stop and you come out of it like a timeout, but the location is based on the location penalty. So it can either be brick or midfield. So that's that one. Okay, dangerous play. We could talk for an hour about dangerous play, but I won't. So we changed it. Basically, you can read the rule. I'm not going to read it to you. You can, we've taken the requirement for contact out of the rule. And what that means is a player is not required to hold a position and receive contact in order to call dangerous play. But just having the possibility of contact isn't sufficient to justify a call. Also, if the player that they were calling dangerous play on actually stops or changes their path such that contact wasn't going to occur, contact wasn't reasonably certain, and a dangerous play call is not valid. So I do want to say that, we tried our best not to favor the offense or defense in writing this. It's equally incumbent on all players to play safely. However, we did in general put the onus on safe play on the player trying to make a poach block without excusing unsafe behavior from, for instance, an offensive receiver. And so I think the idea is just to make everybody more aware of what they're doing. You can't run without looking into a space forever. That's unsafe. So we tried our best to balance that. But I think that's all I'm going to say about that one. Travel. We mentioned it earlier, play does not stop if the disc is not thrown on a travel call. And it's funny, some players were already doing this, even though we didn't have a rule yet. The key here is, though, somebody needs to, they should tell them where to go back to. You can't stall throughout that movement. You can resume your stall once the pivot is set, but the thrower should still also touch the disc to the ground. And if the thrower wants to contest, in this case, you call violation. Hopefully, WFDF has used this for a long time, so hopefully players get used to it. I think we'll see how the players use it or abuse it and see what we need to add to our standard, how we handle these situations. But we haven't played with it enough. I think that's it for the rules.
All right. Thank you, Jana. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about fitness. And then that's going to wrap up the overall presentation. We'll stop this recording and then we'll go into Observer University Overtime, where we answer some of your questions, right? That portion won't be recorded. That is only for those of you who watched this live. So talking about fitness, and who better to talk to it than the male Adonis myself, which is a joke. But seriously, though, being an observer, it is physically demanding what we're doing out there on the field. We don't observe to stay in shape. You may work a tournament and you say to yourself, wow, I really got to work out there. Well, that's good, but that should not qualify as your workout. We don't observe to stay in shape. We stay in shape so that we can observe. And that shape, of course, is going to look different for all people, right? We all have different body types. As we return to a sport after quarantine, it can be very tricky. And that's the big part of why we're talking about this. There's been an uptick in injuries in youth, college, and even recreational sports. Lots of lower body injuries from anything from large muscles to knees and ankle injuries. After the 2011 NBA lockout, there was a surge in ACL injuries, and these are professional athletes, right? They sat out longer than normal. When they returned to play, we had a uptick of injuries. I recently saw a football player running in a straight line, doing nothing but running in a straight line, then hits the ground. I had a torn Achilles injury. And this is because people have been sitting around for over a year. Yeah, they may have been a little bit active, or maybe they just thought they were in better shape than they were. They come out there, things are tighter than they were before, and so things are getting torn. So move. We need to work out. We need to be jogging. Observers should really, even on the day of a tournament, we should be warming up at least 10 minutes at the beginning of the day. You know, we've all worked those tournaments where we've just walked onto the field and we started going. That's not going to be a recipe for long-term success. We need to be jogging in the pregame. We need to be doing side shuffles. We need to be doing our backwards jogging. Stretching also so important, especially at the end of the day. You know, good stretching at the end of the day is going to aid in recovery. It's going to make a big difference on how you feel the next morning. You may pop a bunch of Advil the night before because you're so sore in the morning. Add stretching to that, and that's really going to assist your overall recovery. And this stretching, it shouldn't start the day of a tournament. If you're starting it on the day of a tournament, you're going to be in trouble. Start this weeks ahead of the tournament. Start it tonight, if at all possible. A few weeks ahead of time, at a minimum. Another thing we need to be doing is moving a lot. Question is, you know, when did you last work out? Okay, when did you last jog a mile? Right? Like, well, I haven't jogged in a long time. Well, you're going to be running a lot up and down an ultimate frisbee field, and you don't know the last time you jogged a mile. Right. These are things that we need to get back in the habit of, because if we don't, we're going to, we think we're going to be ready for these tournaments, but, you get into a 2-3 day tournament and you're just going to get beat. Both working out, both jogging are so important at this high level of ultimate that we want to observe. It's physically demanding. It can take its toll. As far as working out, you can work out at home with your own body weight. You can go to a gym, but you should be doing something. Have you ever observed, I know there's been a few seasons where I've gone out on the field, and like the first day on the field, the first game, my back just gets sore, from standing too long. Why are you sore from just standing there? Right. These are things that wouldn't happen if I had worked out ahead of time and really been physically ready for these particular games. When your back is sore, that's your body saying that you're not used to using those muscles for so long. We need to get them working out. Can you even run a mile, right? Can you jog a mile? You should. How long does that take? Well, that's up to you, right? It could take 10 minutes to start. Maybe you get down to 7 minutes, but whatever that is, we just got to get moving, just got to get jogging, so that we're ready for the field. And then eating well, especially at a tournament. Garbage in is garbage out, right? If you're not eating right, your tank is going to empty very quickly on the field. We've had those days where we get to our third game and we're just exhausted, right? Wonder why that is. What did I eat the night before? What did I eat at lunch, right? That's why when we go to these tournaments, we complain about maybe pizza being served at lunch, right? But it was the night before that you ate pizza. We got to be thinking kind of bigger term for the diet, the things that we put inside of our bodies leading up to a tournament. You know, when you are not eating the right things leading up to a tournament, and even on tournament days, you know, mentally you start getting easily distracted. I have been there. That's why we're talking about this. We have to have a balanced diet going into and during the tournament. And a tournament is not a place to lose weight. Right. I've gone to tournaments and thought, oh, you know, I'm just going to eat half of this because, wow, I worked out a lot on the field today. Again, you're saying that was my workout, right? You know, I worked out a lot, you know, and boy, if I only eat half of this, I'm going to be calorie deficient. I'm going to leave this tournament down probably a half a pound or a pound or something like that. That is the worst way to think about it. A tournament is not a place to be on a diet. It can be strenuous by the end of your third or fourth game, and you have to eat. You cannot diet for dinner. You cannot reduce your calories for dinner. Your body's going to suffer, and so will your mental game on the field. So at a tournament is, if you're on a diet, a tournament is a good time to eat well. A tournament is a good time to eat a little bit more than you're used to, because I can almost guarantee that the activity you're doing over the course of a 2 or 3 day tournament is a lot more than the activity that you normally do from your day to day. So at the tournament, eat up, make sure that you're taking in the proper nutrition, and that is going to better position you for success, not just mentally, but physically as well. Both are key to being a good observer. All right. So that is pretty much it for the presentation session of our first session back of Observer University. Coming up in our next 3 sessions, you know, we talked earlier about 90% certainty. You know, we're going to talk about in our future sessions, what does 90% certainty look like? You know, can I get to 90% by, I'm only at 45%. Can I get to 90% by talking to somebody else? You know, when I'm 90% certain, is it possible to be 100% wrong? We'll talk about things like that. We're going to talk about one of my passions, good game management. You know, how strict are we going to be with timing? How strict are we going to be with offside? When should you talk to a player? When should you get a coach involved? Things like that. And then, of course, preventative officiating. You know, how do I talk to the player to prevent them from doing something that I see escalating, right? These are all things that are going to better position us for success as we get into the season. So as we wrap up, big thank you to Wally, to Mitch, to Jana. This presentation came together in whirlwind fashion, but we are now better positioned for our next 3 sessions. So thank you to all 3 of you. If you have questions, my name's Hank Carey. You all have my email address from getting it off the observer list. If you have questions, comments, topics, ideas, please email them to me, and that will conclude our first session of Observer University as we get back to the game after this year of COVID.